So you're saying it's for when you want to like have that data be ready to be fetched when you do click, so that it doesn't take as long, basically?
Not so that it doesn't take as long. When I load up this page, it's done. It's a dead thing. If I also need to load up some data that like wasn't typed into the file or compiled into it or something like that, or isn't my shit. I don't own the Pokemon API. Even if I did, if I want to keep it separate from my web page, so my web page and my mobile, my native mobile app and all these other things can also access the data. That's why I need to be able to fetch it from that URL and put it into a page that's already loaded. That's the idea there. So let's talk about our objectives. We want to learn how to do that with a GET request. We want to learn how to do that with a POST request. It's a little bit different. And then once we've done these things, we want to talk about some of the stuff we just talked about and be able to explain what fetch is. So for this first one, let's see. I want to make, so what's a good public API we can use to make the GET request? How about that Pokemon API? All right, so if we do something like Pokemon/1, and we should get Bulbasaur back. So let's, we can improve that works by just going to the browser and typing Pokemon/1 or 100 or whatever. There we go, whole bunch of data, right? I want everybody to get that far. Go to Google Pokemon API and then see if you can get this into your browser and get some stuff showing up. You've been awfully led on high fives, and it is Friday.
If they want high fives, they can come.
Whoa!
I got tired of seeking them.
By week 9, Malcolm was over it with the fucking high fives. Again, you guys aren't even updating the board anymore. Monsters. So this is like suspiciously like a JavaScript object. So we can do all the things that we normally do with JavaScript objects, like looping through shit and doing data transformations and any of that kind of stuff. So wouldn't it be neat if I could make a Poke API page that like I could look up this data and then put some Pokemon into it. So what I want you guys to do, you can follow along with me on this.
Did anyone else just get a huge object that looks like this?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
We're using Firefox, and Firefox is pretty. Well, you
Yep.
might have an add-on that does that.
Okay, so what we need to do for this is we're going to make an index HTML file. We're going to make an app.js file. And then we're going to go into our index.html file. What's the first thing I have to put here?
Doc type.
Doc type. And then I'll put some HTML in. I need to put the head in. I need to put the body in.
You know, add them on the top.
Well, I can use Vim snippets too, but I'm trying to like keep it follow alongable. Jerk. Okay, I want to attach that script. So I'll say app.js. Ooh, actually, I'm going to throw that at the bottom of the body. We can talk about why another time. I need to give this a title. Call it Pokemon. One other thing I have to put in the head for this to be valid HTML.
Oh, meta car set equals UTF-8.
Yep. Frequently forgotten, but technically required. Cool. So if I do these things, I have an HTML document. Make sure we get this far. We should also be able to serve this up. So if I let me make my screen a little bigger. If I do an HTTP-server, I should be able to get that going, right?
Why do you use HTTP-server over web server?
Because that's the one that I use. It doesn't have a clever name. And nothing in there right now, but if I put something in there, like H1 Pokemans, shows up on the page. So I have a functioning HTML page that is connected to an app.js file. I can prove that by just doing something dumb in this app.js file. And when I load this up, it will not do anything. Are we wired up right? Should be.
Script, yeah.
It works for me. It's on my machine.
Please hear HTML.
Yeah, give me there we go. All right, it worked. I'm just crazy. I'll bet Firefox doesn't allow alert because it's the worst part of JavaScript. All right, so I have a working app.js file. So what we want to do is fetch Bulbasaur. So if we take that URL that we had before, just copy that guy over, and let's throw it in a variable. Good so far? So now, let's fetch that. You type the fetch word, it's a function, and we're going to fetch the URL. However, it's not just any old function, it's a special kind of function. Mr. Marlowe said it earlier, somebody else, what special kind of function is this? Starts with an A? Asynchronous. Meaning that if I do something right after this console log is actually probably going to run before this fetch finishes up. So if I want to make sure that this fetching that URL has completed, I need to be very explicit about that. And I do that with what? .thens. So I say, hey, fetch this URL, and then, and then, and then. So you chain these off of each other. What goes into .then? Callback. So take a function, and it's going to be whatever the result of that was. So we say it's the response, and then how fetch works is we get this response back, and it's just ones and zeros. We got to parse it somehow. So we want to say we're going to return response.json and invoke it. That's also an asynchronous thing. So we need to .then off of that, and we're going to give that a callback. That's our response. And if we console log that, we should see Bulbasaur.
So it's asynchronous because you don't want to start one thing before the other thing is completed.
Exactly. Well, it's asynchronous because it happens over a network. And like we don't know how long that's going to take. We don't even know if it's going to work. The way that JavaScript works is if we don't handle this asynchronously, it literally freezes your browser waiting for the thing to come back. That's probably not what we want to happen. So since we don't know how long that's going to take, we're saying it makes no sense to do this until this is done. So let's be very explicit about the order that things are happening in.
And why are we just throwing in a JSON file to reference later? Or?
Nope, right now all we're doing is logging it. Just making sure that we can get in our browser, on our page, some Bulbasaur.
So what is the format of the data before you turn it into a JSON?
It's just a bunch of beeps and boops. So I can parse it as JSON, I can parse it as text, I can parse it as a blob, which is like an image or something like that. I have a couple different things I can say, like, I know what this response is, and I want you to interpret it this way. But if you do, technically I think it's called a bit stream before you parse it. All right, so let's check it out. Am I getting that sweet old Bulbasaur back? Oh, probably not, because, no, this should work. Oh, I'll bet. Maybe you have to make that HTTP. Let's see. Interesting.
With mine, it just like took a while for it to show up.
Okay. Oh yeah, it's a free API, which means it's slow as hell.
Yeah.
Another thing you can do is if you throw a dot catch after all of your dot thens, you can, if there's ever a problem with any of this, you can tell it what you want it to do. So I'm going to pass this console.error. You could also do this the same way we did the other ones here, where you give it a callback. It says error, and console.error it. Console.error is like console.log, but it makes it show up in red. It's nice. All right. There we go. Hey, it's Bulbasaur! There's our guy. And this is a JavaScript object, which means we can do JavaScript-y kinds of things with it. So I want you guys to all get this far. Everybody to make this GET request.
So when we were doing like the candy shop sort of stuff, was that sort of practice for manipulating APIs?
Yes. Because like you're never going to get the API back at like exactly what your app needs. So you need to transform it somehow. All the skills that you got at Candy Shop, that's how that works. Got it?
It takes forever.
Pokemon's have a wait.
Anybody need a hand?
How long
see your HTML document.
Yeah.
Console-wise?
As a note, your script does have to be at the bottom of the body for this to, well, it'll work without it, but make sure that your script is at the bottom of the body.
Did we see your app.js file again? Oh, yeah.
So once you get this working, let's refactor it. This is like kind of hard to read. So there's some shorthand syntax we can use that'll help a lot. But keep in mind, it means the exact same thing. We could take out this function keyword, and we can take out the parentheses around this, and we can do what's called a fat arrow. It's equals, and then a greater than sign, and then just say response.json, and that's the same as returning it. And if you close that up, that does the exact same thing. And
Do you not need the curly brackets with the fat arrow notation?
indeed, you need it if you want to do it on more than one line or issue more than one statement or something like that.
Type up exactly the two different ways side by side.
Yeah, sure.
Would it be bad form to include the curlies on a one-line up arrow?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, so if I want to refactor this to be like super sexy, it would look something like this. Oh, how nice is that?
So you're console logging just so that you as a developer can see what the
Yep.
personified response is.
Yeah, we like in real life we need to do something with it,
Right.
but this lets us make sure that this is working.
So, why would our console? I'm getting an error with the colon
Mhm.
after HTTPS. Why is that?
Okay, shall we? Code? Because this is a string. You're not treating this as a string.
Oh.
So you don't have functions for the second then or the cache?
So what it takes, what a callback is a function definition. Console.log is a function definition. So is console.error. So think back to something we talked about in 70 really early on. That, when I invoke it, now it's just interchangeable with whatever the result of that function is. Until then, it's just the definition of a function. It's like I typed it out longhand like that.
So the response is just the argument automatically, so it's
Yes.
going to automatically
Yes.
put that in the console log?
It's going to call this function with whatever the argument is. Pretty cool. Questions? Getting back some data?
I'm sorry, can you just explain again how the console log is working there?
Mm-hmm. So, let's do it without console log. Let's say I have a function called display Pokemon, and it takes a Pokemon and does something.
Are you console logging the function? You're console logging the argument response, right? Is that,
Yes.
That's why it's returning the array?
Right.
Or object?
So I have a function definition here. I could do anything with this. Let's say I just console log it, though. So this is a function definition. If I take out that console log, takes a function definition. Under the hood, console.log is just a declared function like this. And it takes a bunch of arguments and then just poops them onto the screen. That's what it does. So let's make sure this still works. Still getting Bulbasaur back. True, how you doing?
I'm just almost there for that problem.
Okay. Alright, so we'll fetch the URL and then have your response. Good. Good. So, get rid of the line 6. And then close the curly brace. Yep, and then close the parentheses. Cool. Bring this back up to the end of that. Done. And then inside of that, console log is. So inside of this, we can find the settings. Yep. right, cool. So, this is kind of neat. Doesn't do us a whole lot of good though, right? You need to be able to like actually show it on the page. So how about we do something useful with this? So I'm getting this Pokemon in here. Let's take a look at what comes back. I get its name, height, and weight. Cool, sounds good to me. So what if I do something like I make a container to put this in. So right above this, I'm going to have a div. I'm going to give it an ID of featured Pokemon. And then I'm going to look that up. So I'll say document dot, how do I?
Query selected?
I'll take it. And what am I going to pass into this?
The class or the ID.
Yep. And I do IDs this way. Featured Pokemon. So that's going to give me a reference to that DOM element. And then I could do something like Pokemon.inner HTML. And I'm going to use backticks on this. It's a little bit easier to do multiple lines.
What is that dollar sign doing?
It's just a label. It doesn't do anything special. It works just as well if you get rid of, if you get rid of it.
So it's not jQuery.
Yep. That pattern comes from jQuery, but it's saying, yo, this is a DOM element. It's just a note to yourself. It doesn't do anything special. And then inside of this element, I might want to say something like P. I'll make this actually H2. And we'll say something like Pokemon dot, what is it, name? And then I'll maybe have a paragraph here that says something like Pokemon dot weight. I might put weight in front of that. And I might do one for height also. And that should make Bulbasaur show up on the page. Let's see what happens. Anything? There's Bulbasaur. So we made a GET request. We got some data from somebody's cool API, and then we did something with it on our page. That's pretty neat. So I want to give everybody a chance to catch up to that. I want everybody to make a GET request. Give yourself an example.
Are you okay, Kimberly? Transferred our 401ks.
Oh. 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 Oh, wait a minute. I don't have a 401k with this one. They don't even match it. I'm going to wrap it in backticks.
I know, I haven't revamped it yet, so copy and paste
Yeah, that'll open it up.
And why are we wrapping it back to June?
So, a couple reasons. One is that we want to have it go on multiple lines. And the second is that it is beautifully handy to be able to do these, they're called template literals, where I can have a string and then put variables inside of that without having to do that goofy ass string concatenation shit with the plus sign. It's a fancy JavaScript trick. But yeah, if you did this with quotes and then just plus in the variable name, it does the same thing, but this reads a lot nicer.
Do we not have to invoke that function?
Great question. You mean the display Pokemon?
Yeah.
So, if I invoke that function, what happens to it? What does the invocation get replaced with?
Say that again?
If I invoke Pokemon, what does this end up evaluating to?
Nothing if you don't put anything in the arguments.
Take a look at what this function does. Let me ask you this. What does display Pokemon return?
Yeah, so it needs the data in order to even do any of this, right?
Not what I'm looking for. What does display Pokemon return?
HTML.
Yeah.
How does it return HTML?
Returns single items that you called from the.
So if I wanted to return HTML, I might do something like return some HTML. That's not what I did.
It's returning what you grabbed with the query selector.
No, I mean, it doesn't have to return anything, but it posts those things into your H2 and your trees.
So the first part of that sentence is what I was looking for. It doesn't return anything. It can still do stuff. That's called a side effect. But this function does not return anything. So if I invoke this function, what comes back? What does it evaluate to? True. It would return as true if I did that. But that's not what I did. What does this, a display Pokemon invoked evaluate to? Undefined.
But it still does all that stuff.
Still does all that stuff. Still has the side effect. And so, to answer Tyler's question, this is exactly the same as passing undefined into that. It would be like I did this. Probably not what I want to do.
So when you write the function without invoking it, what does that achieve when it goes through the asynchronous process?
So dot then takes a function definition as its argument. That's a function definition. What it does is it calls this function and passes in whatever the result of the last dot then was. So it passes Pokemon in and invokes it. But you need to tell it what to invoke. So in the long form way we were doing this before, we're using the function keyword and all this kind of shit. It's called an anonymous function. This is just a declared function. Same shit, but I gave it a name, which is nice because it means I can test it. I can do all sorts of stuff with it separately. Pretty cool. Other questions about doing it this way?
Could you explain again why we use backticks?
Yep, absolutely. So 3 different ways I can make a string. I can say that. String 2. With double quotes. Or I can do backticks. All 3 of these are identical. The first 2 function exactly the same also. The third one gives me a little bit of extra juice. What I can do on this third one is if I do $ and curly braces, I can put variables in there, and it just puts them into the string.
What do you call that again?
Template literals or string interpolation. Remember that for a job interview or something like that. Template literals is probably the fastest way to remember that. Template literals. But this string 4 or string 3 is exactly the same as if I did this. These two lines are exactly the same. The first one reads a lot better. Other questions about getting our Pokemon on the page?
Mine's not working, but sure.
All right. Let's feel free to like pair up, help each other out if you got it working, or if you just want to see how somebody else messed theirs up different than yours. Featured. Is that
Well, because I'm trying to console out to see what this is.
Oh.
Just figure out
Okay, featured Pokemon. You are getting featured Pokemon.
Yeah, it took me like 5 minutes to realize I still had the console log in there. That's why it wasn't working.
But your second win, is still console log instead of networking.
Pretty cool.
Your console logging here, you gotta like actually just how much
We'll understand a lot of API stuff, but
Fix the spelling.
Oh, okay, so
not
not
really just like one role.
Yeah, so you don't want to do it
Start thinking about your next set of drills.
Set of console log.
Yeah, just like how does it work if you have a visual API? Data set. Yeah. That's a good question.
I bet it's really good.
Yeah, I would not accept that. So, are you getting a launcher error on your function? Like, alright, working?
Yeah, I get that all the time.
I think they might have been doing
Yeah.
something like
I might need to just go right now.
Network error. Interesting. Take a look at the network error.
No, he's doing the same thing, he's console logging.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Oh, Catherine.
No, she's still. I didn't see you change that part. Everybody did that.
Yeah, so is anyone else, so you need to change the console log to invoke the function.
The dot then, thing.
Yeah, I missed that one. That had me for a couple minutes.
How you doing, Todd Mustard?
It's working.
Good.
Yep.
True, how you doing? Good.
Yeah, I didn't have a. Probably command forward side.
Those were just examples. You'll have to copy those last four.
Yeah, I do that all the time. Yeah, I do that constantly.
Is your URL HTTPS?
All right, you okay?
Right?
Yeah.
Yes. In fact, like that's the only way that I really know how to comment out like multiple lines. Like I always forget how to. It's like command.
I love how
star.
fast this API is.
Or not command star, /*. And then
Your refund is in the mail.
at the beginning and end of what you want to comment out. I never do that. I always just
Okay.
highlight it and then command /.
I like the command plus L highlights on that.
Oh yeah, yeah. I only learned that yesterday.
Shut me down from math.
Yep. Yeah, that's.
We're all the same thing. We're learning all the same thing.
Yeah, it's super helpful. I had like this big set of notes to just like random keyboard shortcuts and stuff. And yeah, I always like look back over it just to like remind myself.
Yeah,
all
no,
the
I
time, just-
know, I was joking.
I feel like it just makes me so much faster. Yeah, that's
100 seconds is a lot
crazy.
longer.
I am always nervous, it's very scary to like.
I know, that's, I wasn't.
No, I like went to practice and like everything, but okay, it's okay, it's okay. We can solve problems.
It will be more.
Magic. Magic is what happened. How you doing, Marlo?
I have no clue what's going on anymore, officially.
All right.
Sweet, it's legit.
I never do like what? Yeah, I was just.
Well, if you do exclamation point tab, it'll
That's what Malcolm's talking about. If you create a blank HTML document, and then on the first line or on the line, up an exclamation point, it'll auto stuff you need to set up an HTML document.
Unprocessed rage.
Yeah, no. And now that we're all like,
yeah. No, it has to be only an index.
I think it's just more. You might have to download Emmet. I thought it was built into Emmet, but it might be.
How you doing, Jane?
Good.
Got it? Yep. Jazz? Hit me.
Oh, so exclamation point tab. Auto copy, like HTML file.
Yeah.
We were just trying to do it and get it to work. We thought maybe we were missing something.
Are you getting your Pokemon show up?
Yeah.
Excellent. Cool. All right, so let's bring it back together. Our first objective was to make a GET request. Seems like we made a GET request, right? So some stuff that we didn't do. This isn't very dynamic, right? This really only gives me Bulbasaur. Not hard to imagine how I could use everything from a form to a URL or something like that to make this last part dynamic. And then you could maybe like get a list of Pokemon, select them from a drop-down, and now you have a Pokemon app. Pretty cool, huh? Okay, so let's talk about this second one, making a post request. What those of you who've attempted this before, what's different when you're making a post request?
So you have to change the default method from get to post.
Yeah, we care about the method. What else?
And you have to specify headers, body.
Headers and body. So without getting too deep in the weeds on this, HTTP request is just a string. It's got different parts to it though. It's got our URL, it has the version of HTTP we're using, it has a bunch of headers, which are just key value pairs. So I can say what content type it is, I can say what kind of thing I'm expecting back. I can say, oh, and by the way, here's my authorization code. And then it has a body, which there's no body on a GET request, because I'm saying, gimme. But if I also want to like post or add something, I gotta have, what am I adding? Body is where that goes. So how this works, wipe, comment all this out, is starts the same way. I'm gonna fetch to a URL. However, I'm gonna pass a second argument in. This argument is an object. So, huge shocker. I need the method, headers, and body. Method, headers, body. And now I need to assign these some values. For method, what are the HTTP methods? Get is one of them.
Get,
Post. What else? What? Delete.
There are a ton of them.
Put. What else?
Patch.
Patch. Options. Head. They don't have like any different functionality to them. They're just ways of labeling your intention. With this URL, I plan to take this action.
So you don't need it.
Well, you need it to send a post request, But post requests aren't magical. They're not any different than a GET request or a PUT request. It's just whatever your server is expecting. So I'm going to make the method post. Headers, we do something that I don't want to really get into how this works in JavaScript. So like just kind of memorize this one verbatim. But we're going to use a keyword called new. And then headers with a capital H. We're going to invoke it. And we're going to pass it a function or an object. And the key of that object is going to be content-type. And the value of it is application JSON.
Is that content type case sensitive?
I don't think it is in Fetch. I think Fetch will do what's called normalizing, which is what it'll just make it this even if you use lowercase.
Yeah.
However, since I have a dash in it, I have to wrap the key in quotes. You can't have a dash in there that isn't wrapped in quotes.
You couldn't use this single. Can you use single? You're saying you can't use single quotes?
No, I can use single quotes.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That's legal. This is not.
So, without getting too much in the weeds here, so when you're doing a post request, you're fetching it, but telling it to turn it into an object, and how?
What I'm saying, I'm describing what I'm sending them. So I'm saying, yo dog, with this URL, I want to make a post request. You need to know that what I'm sending you is JSON, not XML or some other data format. And last thing is, I need to give it a body. And the body has to be a string. So that works. It only does one thing. It makes a fetch request to a very specific URL, post request to a very specific URL, says that it's JSON, and then ironically isn't JSON at all. So if I want to give it an object, what I do is I might say something like, I got a Pokemon, and its name is Open Saurus. But I can't give this an object. It has to be a string, and specifically, it has to be a JSON string. So, how do I turn that into a JSON string?
JSON that's stringified?
Yep. Ta-da! That's how you make a post request. All the other stuff is exactly the same. You can do a .then, and then response.json, and then .then off of that. Woo! That's a post request. Same way, we need to specify the method, the headers, and the body. And the body has to be a string. So let's take a look at the Pokemon API and see if there's anything we can actually post to, because I kind of don't think there is. I might be wrong.
All right, got 4 minutes, Kyle.
Oh, shit.
Are we going to get into like REST and all that stuff?
Someday. Not today, Kimasabe. Yeah, I can't imagine anything you would be able to post to on this. But this is the structure of a post request. You can run this. It's gonna bark at you and go, nah, can't post to my API. But if this was making a new user, if it was adding a blog post, adding a comment, something like that, that's how we do that.
So you use post requests for your own APIs?
You can. There's also other APIs that you can post to, but this would be like, I want to add a Pokemon. They're not going to let me do that. They might have something as like, tell us about a project that you made. You'd make a post request to them, and it would kind of work like this.
So you fetch, like if you wanted to make an app that like searched a bunch of data, like find out, for basically searching, you use fetch, and then for interacting, you use post.
Fetch is used for all of them. You get data with get. You add data with post. Both of them use the fetch function.
So in the drills,
Okay.
we have it post when you click a button. Does this just automatically, like, when it goes through all the JavaScript, just automatically fetch?
Sure, so what this is doing, this just runs top to bottom. So when you load the file, it does this. If I wanted to do that off of a form submission, it would probably look something like query selector, some form, add event listener on submit. And then one of the things that you do in that forms exercise is rather than stringifying some arbitrary shit, you'd grab it off of the actual form. But that's how you do that. All right, so last thing I want to do, so we've made a GET request, we've made a POST request. We want to now be able to explain what fetch is. So I want to give you just a second to think about what fetch is. What is fetch? Stop trying to make fetch a thing. Turn and talk to a neighbor.
I'll talk to them. Okay. No, and then,
It doesn't just grab the data though, right? It could also add
Yeah, I think like
data.
but that's,
gathers
so
data.
fetch is like the umbrella thing, and then post and get are in there. There are things you can do with it.
So this second one.
Do we have to, in the API stuff, or in our P2, do we have to get post?
Yeah, there's basically like no real app.
So how would you use that? Like, if you wanted to build an app,
We should work together.
yeah. How would you get the post?
So why doesn't this work?
So I guess you could have an app that's just like a wrapper around somebody else's API, or like a mashup that combines different things. But you might want to save your like favorite searches, or add a new thing to it.
Just root it all out of the API.
It's like, okay, wrap up your conversations. Mr. Marlowe, what is fetch?
So fetch is a way to get data, like maybe after page load, that grab the data and you can serve it up a way you want.
Oh, mwah, what a terrific answer. Mr. Fricky, what you got for me?
I can just think of an example. So after your page loads, if you want like tweets that are coming out or something like that, you would use a GET request from a Twitter API, because you don't want to have to refresh your page all the time.
Indeed. Cool. True, what you got for me? What's fetch?
Basically an API that lets you request and post it.
So I want to be real careful about language on this. It technically is an API, but let's be specific about our language choice. Let's call it a function. Say that again, and let's call it a function this time.
Okay, so fetch is basically a function that lets you request and post data.
I love it. Cool, very nice. So last thing that I want to do, well, we've made a GET request, we've made a POST request, we've explained what fetch is. Now, one last thing, I want you to write down what fetch is. You can Slack it to yourself, you can put it in your notes, but while it's still hot and fresh, what is fetch? Write it down. Cool. Take the time you need for that, but otherwise, thank you very much, guys.
Thank you, Kyle.
Tepid applause.